Hello everyone, and welcome to Autocrat. This is episode 37, Narcissus.
We are going to be dealing with one of the lesser-known myths in the category of big stories. To clarify, I imagine it's one of those you've heard of, but maybe haven't heard the full story.
Yeah, you might have heard Narcissus being a thing, but you might not know exactly where it comes from.
Yep, very good point. So next time you call someone a narcissist, you will be brilliantly informed. Now, our two principal accounts are Ovid for our ancient source and Robert Graves' book on Greek myths for our modern source. So, diving straight in, Narcissus was the child of a nymph called Lyrope, and I think his father was the river deity called Cephissus. Ovid and Graves notably both say that Narcissus' mother Lyrope was blue. I assume this refers to her skin tone, but you can imagine her as a smurfette if you want.
Is she from the Avatar?
Maybe she's from Avatar, I don't know. They just both mention that she's blue. Anyway, Lyrope was the first individual to seek the advice of someone called Tiresias, who you might remember we talked about in episode 21. Tiresias was made blind because he'd been asked by Zeus and Hera which sex had more pleasure, so male or female. I'm not sure of the context, we're going to skip lightly over it. Tiresias had been both male and female. The quick story there is because he'd been temporarily transformed into a woman after separating two snakes getting intimate, let's say, with his stick. After 8 years, he saw the snakes again and hit them again, turning him back and proving the fiction plot point of the power of doing something a second time with opposite results correct. This is a really random story, and I'm sure if we ever go back to it, we'll have more detail and more understanding, but that's all you need to know.
Sure.
So, Tiresias basically agreed with Zeus that women experience more pleasure, and Hera turned him blind in anger. Zeus then gave him knowledge of the future as recompense for this.
Very nice.
So,
but we know what someone else having knowledge of the future brought, so is that going to bring something good this time?
Well, Tiresias seems to actually have people believe him, so that's something at least.
Good.
So the reason I bring all of this up is a bit of backstory to Lyrope going to visit Tiresias. The prophecy that she got back was that if Narcissus didn't get to know who he was, he would live to old age. Or something like that. Now, Narcissus was beautiful, and from the age of 16, the list of his rejected men and women grew. This exemplifies the problem. He knew he was good looking. He's one of those people.
Okay.
This is where we introduce Echo, a nymph cursed by Hera to only repeat what other people had said and never speak by herself.
Okay. Yeah.
This is because Echo had been used by Zeus to distract Hera with her nattering, while Zeus and his lovers escaped from her. So, in retribution, Hera made sure she could never talk except by repeating what other people had said. The lovers Echo allowed to get away, incidentally, are specified as having been nymphs. Random detail, but there you go. Basically, Hera could have found out they were with her husband in the mountains if not for Echo. But the main point here is that Echo was head over heels for Narcissus.
Who she was?
Yes. Now, on a certain day, Narcissus was separated from his friends while out hunting stags. He called out trying to find them again, and Echo used sentences he'd used to declare, while hidden from him, that she was in love with him. I don't know exactly how she did this, but, taking random words or taking the ends of sentences and using them in a different context.
Okay. So she can speak for herself then, kind of?
Yes. When he saw her, he rejected her.
Okay, it's really, nah, maybe he's just not ready for a relationship.
No, emotionally not mature. So that's the short summary, but if we expand on this a little bit, because it's a bit confusing like this, Narcissus asks if anyone's there, and Echo uses this to call out, here, using the last part of this phrase. Narcissus then asks why this mystery speaker is hiding their identity and that they should join together in that spot. Not a literal quote, but you get the idea. It's a phrase which could be interpreted as asking them to come out and interpreted as saying that they could be a couple, and Echo emphatically chose the latter. She rushed out, and Narcissus said he'd rather perish than sleep with her. And
That's mean.
Yeah. Echo uses the last part of this to suggest the opposite alternative.
Fair.
Which seems quite forward if the person's only met you for the first time that day, but okay. She then, as a result of Narcissus having rejected her, pined away to nothing, and her bones became stones until she was nothing more than a voice. In other words,
The echo?
Yes, this is how the echo came to be. Now, Narcissus also had a man who was in love with him called Aminius. It's spelled Ameinius. I think it's Aminius. Narcissus responded to his entreaties by mailing him a sword. Aminius committed suicide on the doorstep of Narcissus, asking the gods to exact punishment on Narcissus for his demise. He asked that Narcissus fall in love, but be denied it. So, pretty much like Echo and himself. Artemis acted in response to this, although as we'll see, it's quite subtle. Alternatively, it's the goddess Nemesis, who is goddess of revenge. Now, Nemesis' parentage is a mess, but we won't get into that here. Basically, the sources which I've included in this description have 3 or 4 different versions, and there's a lot going on in her life. Anyway, point is, either she or Artemis is responsible for what happens next. Narcissus ended up at somewhere called Donacon, and came upon either a spring or, in some versions, a well. Here, he sat down, looked into the water, and saw his own looks. He became enraptured by the person he saw in the water below, who was obviously himself, but I don't think he was aware of this. And he grieved to both have these looks and never be able to be with the person who looked like this.
Okay, so he was grieving about not being able to be with himself?
Yes, I think either he knows or he doesn't. Whichever way, there's someone who's being denied him.
I mean, if he knows, then he's grieving the fact that nobody will ever be as beautiful as him to be with him. Or if he doesn't know, he's grieving the fact that he's never met someone like him.
Very true. And also, I think in interpretations where he literally thinks there's someone in the water, they seem to disappear when he tries to grab for them.
Okay.
Because obviously the water's rippling and the reflection gets broken up. Echo, who had followed Narcissus, grieved as he drew a dagger and stabbed himself in the chest in sorrow.
Okay.
Really going from 0 to 100 there. The earth drank up his blood and a white flower grew on that spot. The Narcissus flower. Now, that's the version from Graves, but do you want to tell us a bit more about what Ovid says?
Sure. Basically, Narcissus becomes thirsty, goes to drink, and then sees his reflection. He basically thinks it's actually someone else. That's according to Ovid.
Right.
It describes the eyes of Narcissus as being like 2 stars and says that the beauty of his fingers is worthy of them being those of Dionysus.
Gives us quite a good idea of what this lad is supposed to have been like.
Yeah. He starts kissing the surface of the water and trying to put his arms around himself, but it's in vain because, as we've just said, it would just disappear.
Yeah.
And he just wants to keep looking at the water, keep looking at this beautiful person, not realizing it's himself, and he ignores food and every basic needs. He mourns that the love he seeks is beyond him and asks aloud if anyone was ever more denied love than he is.
Right. I think Echo and Aminius might have something to say about that.
Yeah, they might do. He does seem to become a bit aware of the situation, because he tells his reflection that they will now both die with one death.
Right.
So he might have become aware, oh wait, is that actually me? But that means nobody will ever be beautiful enough for me, so I might as well just die. He cries and his tears fall in the water, and the reflection begins to dissipate to his dismay.
Yeah.
And Ovid's theory, or Ovid's recounting, is just that it just wastes away and dies eventually. Okay.
Well, either way, his death is as a result of this reflection, and you can really see why some people thought the goddess of revenge might be behind it. Now, apparently, even in the underworld, he admires his reflection in the river Styx.
Yeah, he hasn't learned a thing.
No. His sisters, the Naiads, the Dryads, and Echo all mourned, and created a pyre looking for his body to burn. However, they couldn't find it. Just a flower, as we also saw with Graves. Now, one last thing is that apparently there is an alternative explanation by a source called Pausanias, which was that he'd lost his similar-looking sister earlier in life and that he thought this reflection he sees in the water was her ghost. In that case, it's just grief that he's feeling and not romantic attraction kind of love. I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that.
Yeah.
So, that's the story. There's another medieval source, Tzetzes, which discusses Narcissus, but his story is basically a brief outline of what we've already covered.
Now, the question I have...
Yep.
You mentioned earlier he turned into a flower, but it's a different flower.
Yep.
So what kind of flower it is?
Right, now this led me down a flower-based Narcissus rabbit hole, which I'm going to recount to all of you now. Robert Graves says that the flower Narcissus turns into is white with red, but Ovid says it's yellow with white in the centre, so we can immediately see there's a discrepancy between our two sources. To add to this, I'll say that Statius in his Thebaid only really has the detail that the flower is pale. I thought originally that it was a snowdrop, as this is called a narcissus in Dutch. However, the website Theoi says that Narcissus was the Greek word for daffodil, so we've got two different possible ideas here, a snowdrop or a daffodil. The International Union for the Conservation of Nature ascribes the pheasant's eye narcissus a white colour, and its map shows that it is found in parts of Greece, which I thought supported the idea of a snowdrop type flower being the one we're looking at. You know, the range means it would have been found in Greece at that time. Moreover, when I looked up the scientific name for daffodils and put what I found on the Kew Gardens website into the IUCN Red List, the results all came back with snowdrops, supporting what I originally thought. So the bottom line is, I think he turns into a snowdrop. It could be either. Sometimes the wording is a little bit ambiguous, as are the colours.
Okay.
Right, well, that brings us to the end of today's story. Thank you all for listening, and hope the flower-based tangent at the end didn't put you off too much.
And as a side note, we do have some fun polls on our YouTube and one on our website at the minute, a quiz-type poll. So if you want to go have a try of that, have fun, and see you next week.
Yeah, have a great week, everyone.
Well, that wasn't what I was expecting for Narcissus.
No, wasn't what I was either. I knew the basic outline, but...
I was expecting a completely different story.
Oh, really? I'm pretty sure the motorcycle came up in the recording.
Well, if the motorcycle came up in the recording, have fun hearing what we hear during our recordings.
Yeah.